Okay, going out live to you now on YouTube, and you should be able to pull it in from X.
Play this game, cheat. Come on, I'll show you.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Eeryk and Simon Show. G'day, Eeryk.
Hey, how you going, Simon?
Really well, chap. Good to see you. How's your week going?
Oh, my week? Yeah, it's been pretty. I've quite enjoyed it. To be fair, I've slowly got back into things after the new year, and so I'm pretty pumped up.
Okay, well, that's fantastic. And the last time I saw you, you were off to go and watch a medley of films like Star Wars or something.
Yeah, Batman. So Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Batman trilogy, and so for whatever reason, right now, the cinema is doing a bit of a promotion of Christopher Nolan films, and I had the opportunity to go and watch each and every one of them, one after the other. And being the nerd I am, well, I couldn't exactly turn that opportunity down.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, one of the questions I often ask potential nerds when I'm interviewing them for tech jobs is, which is a better franchise between Star Wars and Star Trek? What do you reckon?
I don't touch Star Trek with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, I always
That's
say,
me.
it's always a bit of a joke. I say the answer is neither of them. The real answer is Babylon 5. All right, I see some of our regulars have joined us. PLJ is here. Good evening. Shortland Chambers is as well. Ahoy. And yep, so is Phil. G'day, Phil. Nice to see you. Phil was hoping to catch up with us, Eeryk, at some point. Message me today while he's in town. That would be quite good. I also think that the 20th today is Dagsy's birthday. Dagsy, friend of the show, happy birthday from us.
Yeah, happy birthday to you, mate.
And I think I'm going out on my channels tonight. I'm going out on YouTube, Instagram, Rumble, Twitch, and X. Eeryk, what are you going out on?
Yeah, so just X and YouTube for me tonight. That seems to do the trick for me, and so for everyone that does pop along, thank you very much for tuning in.
Okay, fantastic. Well, look, guys, just so you know, if you enter anything on the chat, people can see it on the other platforms. That works on mine, but not on Eeryk's. We haven't worked out yet how that we can integrate people chatting on his channels with mine. But yeah, he's keeping an eye on it in the meantime. All right, guys, we have a bunch of articles that we wanted to go through to talk with you about tonight. And the first one comes to us from Eeryk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change our view and hand over to you, young fella. One moment. I should be able, this should work. Yeah, okay. So sorry, no, I've got the wrong window. It's this one, this article from the Noticer. Over to you, young fella.
Yep, so we've got this article from the Noticer, and
oh, sorry, dude, I haven't got your audio working. One moment. Why am I not hearing you? Oh, it's probably everyone else is hearing you and I'm not. Okay, well you can talk away, chap. I think I just need to arrange it so that I can hear you.
Okay, so we've got this article from the Noticer just here, and I thought with this one I'd have a little bit of fun because obviously you can see from the title here, concert in Christchurch charges white people $10 extra for tickets. That is, that's quite laughable. That's something that we can laugh about. It's a serious topic if we actually look at this issue at its heart, but it's something that we can laugh about. So I thought with this first one, I would take the time to find a way to talk about it a little bit more lightheartedly. And so really we've just got this kind of first section of the article, and you're more than welcome to go and check the rest of it out on your own time. But this first section of the article essentially just been rewritten a little bit. And that's how I'm going to articulate that to you now. So the organisers of a concert in Christchurch, New Zealand are like the ultimate party crashers. They're hosting a gig called Sunday Sessions, and instead of charging everyone the same price for tickets, they're playing favourites. Get this, they're charging white people more money to attend a party where they'll be surrounded by people who are really good at hula hooping and eating poi. The original ticket prices were like a math problem. Early bird for all people, because who doesn't love an early bird special? $15 for Tangata Moana, that's Māori and Pacific Islander folks, and $20 for Tangata Tiriti, that's their allies, aka the people who are paying more to be friends with them. $30, yeah, because nothing says friendship like a $15 price difference. But don't worry, they changed the wording to make it sound less racist. Now it's just early bird equals $15, a loafer access ticket, which is $20, an ally access ticket, which is $30. And the director, Grace, said it's all about reducing financial barriers for Māori and Pacific communities. Yeah, by charging them less money. It's like saying, hey, we know you're really already struggling, so let's just give you a discount, but only if you're not white. So I think that's probably one of the best ways that we can look at this particular article and make it even more absurd than it is already. Um, and so I do find that a little bit concerning that we've even found ourselves in this position where we've got a group that is quite frankly, as the actual article writer here from the notices said, Browntown is a far left taxpayer funded Māori and Pacific Islander community group which uses the anti white slogan Make Christchurch Brown Again. I mean, I'm pretty sure we just spent the better part of the last 8 years arguing that Make America Great Again wasn't an inherently white supremacist slogan. So would it not, would it not track that this would be a brown supremacist slogan? What do you reckon, Simon?
Yeah, well, I think this is one of the issues that we've got in New Zealand is we've got this whole focus on equity, and equality is a dirty word to all of these intersectionalists, all of these critical race theory people, and they do things like they try and redefine what racism is. You know, to any of these people, racism is not discrimination against a person based on race. There's a power element too. Like, in order to be racist, it's not just discrimination. You also have to have more power than the group that you're being racist against. And they honestly believe this. But what's really quite fascinating to me about it all is that there has been no legal consequences to this. Like, we've seen the Race Relations Commissioner weigh in and say, oh, yeah, it's fine because they've changed the wording. But in point of fact, this is illegal in New Zealand to discriminate against people based on race. And one of the points that I often make is, and Dr. Muriel Newman, in an article we'll talk about later, brings this up as well. There are no consequences when people like this on the left break the law. And I think that, just even if it's just an object lesson, people who behave like this, I think, should be prosecuted and be seen to be prosecuted.
Yeah, and it brings us back to that poem from a couple of years ago, which we can pretend is, oh, it's protected because it's a piece of art. But, you've got a poem by a half white, half islander woman who is apparently famous for children's books, which is quite concerning given the content of this poem that she wrote. But the poem was more or less talking about how she wants to get van full of Pacifica women to go around hunting down white men and gutting them like pigs, because anyone that can be even loosely associated or connected to the likes of Captain James Cook must be inherently evil. That's the way that these sorts of people think.
Yeah, and which is absolutely awful in and of itself. And I disagree with the art defense there, but okay, they've played the art card to say, okay, well, this is art, and it's when things are art, they do get a little bit more leeway. It is fair in terms of public discourse, that that is fair and reasonable. But my counter to that would be, okay, well, it's taxpayer funded art. If you're going to play the art card, sure, create art like that, which is contentious, but don't expect taxpayers to pay for it. And, I would have liked to have seen the public funding from Creative New Zealand to that awful, awful man-looking woman cut off because she's just an out and out racist, if you ask me. And same thing with these Browntown people down in Christchurch. I think, there needs to be a consequence, but also we need to be able to say to these people, look, you know what? What you're doing here is not something that society supports, and we're going to cut off public funding. Guys, those of you in the chat, I see some other people have come in. I'll say hello in a moment, but do let us know how our audio is coming through and how our video is coming through, just to make sure, because the way we're doing things, we had to kind of make it up a little bit on the fly tonight, and we just want to make sure that everything is working. I see TNSNZ is here, who says, hey guys, always watching, always listening. Life is busy and challenging. Keep them on their toes, Mr. Anderson. It seems you are forging a path. Credit where it is due. So is young Eeryk here, even if he is a Star Wars fan. Phil says, is that if you just look white? Yeah, I think that's exactly what they were doing. And Shortland Chambers says, why have Pacifica become an extension of Maori and so-called treaty rights? Yeah, Shortland Chambers, that seems really strange to me too. Like, there are massive cultural differences between most of the Pacific Islanders and Maori. And I think that, there are some social challenges which affect their communities as well. But, for historical reasons and geographical reasons and cultural reasons, they are very, very different in many, many ways. And you see that. So, yeah, it seems really, really strange. And PLJ offers an opinion there and says that it's a cultural appropriation. And I think that is, there's probably some truth to that. Auditing New Zealand is here. Good evening on YouTube, who says kia ora to you too. PLJ says there are laws against hate speech, grooming, PDFs, but they are selectively applied. That is very, very true. And Dr. Evo, my old friend, is here, who says that we are both coming in loud and clear. All right, Eeryk. So what do you reckon should happen to these Browntown people down there in Christchurch?
I mean, well, in a just society, they would have at very least had a visit from the police, I reckon, because at the end of the day, it is a crime. But for me, all I personally expect as an individual is that they're held accountable by the rest of the community. And in this case, we had their original venue, Moi Moi, or whatever it was called, cancel their venue because they don't want to associate with such blatant discrimination. And so now they're just a venue to be announced event. And so, that's a good sign. I would also say that if you were planning on going and you don't agree with this behavior, then you just don't go. But of course, that's completely up to you. I'm not someone who thinks, oh, that person was racially, discriminating, and so we should throw them in a prison cell. But hey, to be honest, I wouldn't mind a fine. But I wouldn't know the process of all that happening, so I don't want to say anything too specific.
All right. Well, I've got a counter argument for you, and that is that 3 businesses around me have been operating a no Maori policy for several years. So what happened is when Jacinda Ardern and Chloe Swarbrick bust in all of the homeless people and a bunch of criminals and the 501s into Auckland CBD, crime went through the roof. A police officer at a public meeting I attended said that crime had gone up 500% and serious assaults had gone up 300%. This is about 3 or 4 years ago. So just kind of like, halfway through COVID, excuse me. And because of the crime and because the police were not policing it, what 3 businesses did around me, 1 is a dairy and 2 are alcohol shops, is they stopped serving Maori people. And this was what started this was a bunch of Maori people went in, and it was one of those organized raids where 1 or 2 people attacked the shopkeeper, and they're assaulting him very seriously while all the rest of their friends are stealing alcohol from the shop. Okay, they did that, and because of that, this ban on Maori was introduced. And how it works is that at both alcohol shops and at the dairy, they just lock their doors, and when a customer comes to the door, they then look at that person and decide whether or not they're going to open the door. And so they're getting around it legally by simply not opening the door if the person is Maori. All right. Now, that has changed a little bit because the dairy now has an open door and they seem to be serving everyone. But even now today, both of those 2 alcohol shops operate a no Maori policy. And they're circumventing the law doing that. But in point of fact, this sort of thing is going on. And that's kind of the opposite side of the fence. However, if they were to be doing it very, very openly, and I see that one of our mutual friends on Twitter made this point the other day when he put up an advertisement for a rental that he had, a two-bedroom apartment rental, saying, okay, well, the price is this for Caucasian and Oriental people, and this is the price if you're brown. And, he was making the point with that, tongue-in-cheek, that if you do that kind of reverse racism, then a whole lot of people have got an awful lot to say, right? Like all of the media, and as you say, the police, everyone would be coming down on anyone putting an advertisement like that. Whereas with these Browntown people, it just seems to be the Race Relations Commissioner saying, oh yes, we don't think that's very nice and fantastic. They've changed the wording.
Well, I mean, that does come into that second article on this from Peter Williams, right? Where it does go on to say the Race Relations Commissioner said, while recognizing the event organizers were well-intentioned. I just don't think the Race Relations Commissioner is in a position to dictate whether or not they were well-intentioned, because quite frankly, based on the ideology that these individuals hosting the event hold, I don't find there's anything remotely well-intentioned about that at all.
Okay, so I've just brought up that article from Peter Williams, guys. If you don't know, Peter Williams is the long-standing broadcaster and journalist who's just in later life has become a social commentator with a lot of very, very interesting things to say. And Eeryk is referencing the article. Where's the bit with the Human Rights Commissioner?
At the bottom. It's maybe it's quite very close to the bottom. You can pretty much see the bottom of the page. It is.
Is it this bit? It is our understanding that the ticketing structure to this event was amended this morning.
No, it's even further below that. Just slightly below that. Neither has the new Race Relations Commissioner made an auspicious start.
Yeah, that's right. Neither has the new Race Relations Commissioner made an auspicious start, while recognising the event organisers were well-intentioned in aiming to increase accessibility for their communities. There are alternative, non-discriminatory avenues which could also achieve the same outcome without the risk of perpetuating negative stereotypes about particular communities. Okay, why did you want to highlight that for us?
Well, primarily because I just don't believe that it's good faith to argue that they were well intentioned. Just because they can pretend they're well intentioned. I think when you look at the heart of people like this group who decided to make the ticketing structure like this, you can't for a second think it's well intentioned, because they're the same type of people that'll sit on TikTok all day and scream about how evil white people are. So I just don't buy it for a second. And if that's the quality of our Race Relations Commissioner, who will just sit there and buy what anyone says and essentially just say, yeah, okay, whatever. I just, kind of pisses me off, to be honest.
Yeah, me
May
too.
as well
And
just kept Ming Foon.
Ming Foon. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that guy was just a disaster. Utterly corrupt. Obviously, with a whole bunch of stuff to do with Kiri Allen and financing this and financing that, and then also being, an out and out anti-Caucasian racist. But I think also in terms of statutory powers, the Race Relations Commissioner is effectively, to a large extent, an advisory role. However, the Human Rights Commission, I think, has more ability to actually wave a stick and introduce some consequences. But I'm not actually sure what the demarcation is. Guys, someone in the chat may know a little bit more about it. But at least you would think that the Race Relations Commissioner could actually come out with at least a harsher statement, and maybe do something which is proactive, like make a recommendation to the police that a crime has been committed, and it would be right and proper for them to investigate, I reckon. Would that be a fair result there?
Yeah, I'd say so. And also, I think Robert Verstraeten on my YouTube chat, he came up with some form of a solution to the issue. I'm not sure how effective it'll be. And he says Jessica and Tova need to investigate it.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. Okay, fantastic. All right, I see some other people here who've joined us. Phil says it's all good on X and YT is good. And on Eeryk's channel, there's music coming through. Two, yeah, I think Eeryk knows that. TNS says, agree, wasn't my intent to be rude. Eeryk also seems to be carving into the voids. Respect to you both. Yep, thank you very much, TNS. It's really kind. PLJ says, which is evidence of Ardern's woke race baiting NZG setting Maori back 50 years. NZG, not sure what that is. Phil says, blowback is a thing. This division has to end. You're right, Phil. And, you know, it's not good, right? Like I see and I hear it, like a bunch of, I was at a dinner about maybe 3 or 4 months ago with some senior executives in the recruitment industry, and they said that they were not putting forward candidates with very obvious Maori names for professional positions. This is positions like lawyers, accountants, technology workers, medical field, that sort of thing. So professional type people. They were saying that the corporate world doesn't want to have to deal with all of the issues around being enforced Maori culture. So because of that, they are pushing back and not hiring Maori people. I think that is not a good thing, but it is an example of what you're talking about. It's that pushback against the sort of the cultural imperialism which has been rammed really down everyone's throats by the left, by Labour, and certainly by the media. Sue is here. The racism of low expectation. Yes, that may have been, I think, Sue, you might be quoting Louise Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam there, but I could be wrong on that source. And just while you're here, Sue, I wonder if you watched the episode of Fun with Fountain Pens that I did for you yesterday. Phil says, speaking of TikTok, the US ban didn't even last 24 hours, I see. Phil, is that right? I tried from a VPN a couple of hours ago, and from an IP in the US, and TikTok was inaccessible while it was still accessible here from New Zealand. Weightbrush is here on X, who says, good luck getting the Human Rights Commission to do a single thing. Weightbrush, I think you're right. I don't have an awful lot of confidence in Mr. Rainbow. They happily went along with locking out citizens. That is true too, but there has been a change in management. And I'm prepared to give Mr. Rainbow the benefit of the doubt, but I certainly think that this was probably one of his big challenges, and he may have decided to just leave it to the Race Relations Commissioner, but I would have liked to have seen him weigh in. PLJ says, like the Privacy Commissioner, etc., etc. NZG are the New Zealand government. Okay, PLJ. Do you have any comments, Eeryk, from your people you want to address?
No, they're all just sitting back and listening to everyone else say exactly what's on their mind, I think.
Okay, all right. Well, I think it's probably, guys, what we thought we might do tonight is that we'd sort of, go back and forth, like Eeryk would talk about an article and a subject that he was interested in, and then I would do the same, and we'd sort of do that, and we'd intersperse that with a little bit of conversation. The other thing we talked about was was introducing some games, when we do one of these things that we can play and which the audience can play with us. And the motivation for it is a radio show that Stephen Marchant, Ricky Gervais, and Carl Pilkington used to do like about 20 years ago. For those who don't know, there was this Sunday radio show in the UK with those three guys that was just ludicrously funny, and a big part of it was Carl Pilkington's silly games. And so we're kind of looking around for some ideas of some stuff that we could do like that. And the best that I could come up with was Lesbian of the Week. I thought it would be quite funny if we could, we would nominate Lesbian of the Week. Who's the lesbian who has fucked shit up for us the most this particular week? Whether or not, it's sinking a ship or it's introducing apartheid to our justice system, that sort of stuff. Eeryk made the point, that's probably unfair. The lesbians are getting a hard time. So he had a different idea.
Yeah, and that was Troon of the Week. You see, I think Troons are a little bit easier to take the piss out of, and also they're the ones pissing on all the lesbian seats. So as I was saying, lesbians are already getting a bit of a hard time in that respect. So yeah.
But I have a question there, Eeryk. If we did go with Troon of the Week, wouldn't that bloke Helen Clark win it every week?
Well, I mean, she's always going to be a contender, but I think that we'll be able to find someone to take over the feet, maybe in the off weeks.
Okay, all right, guys. I think what we'll do, we might play a little bit of music and come back to you shortly with another article. You are watching the Eeryk and Simon show, and I'm going to play a little bit of the orb, but I've just got to cue it up here, so hopefully it works. Okay, I'm going to take you back to the placeholder too.
Eeryk and Simon.
Telegram. Okay, you guys, we're back. Thank you very much for the pleasure of your company. Some comments in the chat. Sorry, guys. Shortland Chambers likes the idea of lesbian of the week. Phil says, sounds like a weekly show is being hinted at. Well, we'll see, maybe. PLJ says, to avoid misgendering, how about the show segment, a freak of the week? The problem with that, PLJ, is that I would win it every week. I'd be pretty sure. Waitbrush says, who cares about misgendering, though? Yep, certainly not me. PLJ is Mount Egmont trans. That is pretty funny. Waitbrush says, oh, probably, but it doesn't matter. And Shortland Chambers wades in, no, but it is a living person. Okay, guys, I have another article for you to discuss and to run past Eeryk as well. Hang on, let me bring that up. Okay, this comes to us from Don Brash, and it kind of plays into what we've been talking about in terms of that equality argument. And Don Brash makes that point, and that's the point that I made earlier, that equality has become a dirty word. To the leftists, equality is the worst thing. They don't want equality. What they want is equity. They want equality of outcome. All right, it's just basic communism. To each, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs is the theory. Okay, so you have this example where to the leftists, they believe the fact that Maori people in New Zealand on average live 7 years less than people from, say, Oriental and Asian cultures or Caucasian people is just absolute proof, inarguable, incontrovertible proof of structural racism inside the health system. They bluntly refuse to look at other factors, for example, lifestyle choice. So they do everything that they possibly can to replace equality with equity. And Dr. Brash picks that up in this article. And I'm going to read a bit of it to you. He says, surely in a liberal democracy, there are few words more chilling to read written in earnest than the flawed concept of equality. But there they were in print in an opinion piece by the National Urban Maori Authority's Lady Turiti Moxon, published in the New Zealand Herald on Tuesday last week. That is exactly right. The Herald published this horrible woman's outright racism in their newspaper. Dr. Brash continues, the Treaty Principles Bill has done exactly what its champion David Seymour intended. It has sparked a national conversation, and that conversation has been eye-opening to say the least. Never could I have ever predicted that equality would be treated as such a dirty word. This article is worth reading in full. But this is the bit which is really quite critical. Dr. Brash writes, no doubt there will be those who read this and quibble about the definition of equality in order to excuse Lady Moxon's disdain for it. Helpfully, she herself included her own definition of the word in her article. This is the equality she considers the government to be placing undue emphasis on. Here is her definition. Equality, being treated the same, having the same opportunities, rights, or resources, regardless of any differences. It implies that everyone has access to the same resources and opportunities, regardless of their race, gender, financial position, or background. Dr. Brash responds, Lady Moxon refers to Maori life expectancy being lower than other New Zealanders as evidence of the failings of equality. Context tells a different story. This is really interesting statistics. In 1891, the life expectancy for Maori was 25 for men and 23 for women. Wow, that is low. In the century and a bit since, this expectancy has steadily climbed so that the 2019 statistics have Maori men at 73.4 years and Maori women at 77.1. Statistical trends show a trajectory of continued improvement in Maori life expectancy can be expected. Notably, Statistics New Zealand says increases in Maori life expectancy were highest in the late 1980s to early 2000s. This period was one of intense focus on equality in New Zealand. Our Human Rights Act was passed in 1993 and Bill of Rights Act in 1990. It was a time of progress for women and minority groups. And this is exactly right. Every society that we have ever known, even from ancient times, has really profited from having things like the rule of law, having things like free speech, and above everything else, having equality. And yet we have all of the forces of the left looking to undo all of that. And let me just change the view so that Eeryk and I are side by side again. And we see this in our public discourse. You see that all of our leftist media, all of the vestigial media is absolutely committed to left-wing, racist, anti-equality ideology. You will see the media grilling people like Dr. Brash, grilling David Seymour, even grilling wets like Cindy boy Chris Luxon about how divisive the Treaty Principles Bill. They are always asking that question. One question you never hear them ask of Rawiti Half-Witty, or that weird little green dude, Chloe Swarbrick, or the ginger tosser who's the leader of the Labour Party, Chris what's his name. One question you never hear them asked by the media is, what don't you like about equality? What don't you like about equality? Our media never asks that question because the answer is there in that article. Anyway, that's my feelings on it. Eeryk, you got a view?
Yeah, well, briefly, what don't they like about equality? Well, asking the question undermines their entire position, therefore they cannot ask it. But also, the article references context and how the context dramatically changes the outcome or the answer to the issue. So, for example, when you're looking at, okay, the life expectancy isn't as high for Māori as it is for non-Māori, and so therefore it must be racism. When you look at the context, obviously it doesn't support that. The issue with it is that it's this very logic which has absolutely infested all of academia. All of our academic spaces, they teach that this inequity in outcome is purely down to racism, and unless we get that outcome to be the same, it's institutional racism, and we have to do more. And so when that is the actual logic that people in our academic spaces are using when they're teaching the next generation, when they're writing reports and they're writing recommendations for pieces of legislation, for judges, and everything else under the sun, it's all predicated on lies. And so how can we actually improve as a society when everything underpinning actual important issues are lies?
Yeah, and certainly something needs to change because it's a massive ideological difference, and it's I think as you allude to, an aspect of it is educational, is saying teaching these kids at in primary school and secondary school that know all of this critical race theory nonsense that your blue-haired teachers who've been trying to trans you have been spouting is just horseshit, and it's not the way the world works, and it is not the way to construct a modern liberal democracy. And to extend that out into universities. I mean, our universities are just sliding down the international rankings because they have just absolutely capitulated to wokery. And then also seeing it in the professions. And I think a really big part of it for me is to undo this. Like one aspect to challenging it is educational. All right. And it is challenging those ideas because let's face it, like most left-wing ideas, they cannot survive in the marketplace of ideas. It is too easy to just strip them, to just repudiate them with logic and reason and critical thinking, which of course is why people like Ardern have things like the Misinformation and Disinformation Project, right? Because misinformation and disinformation is actually truths that the left cannot argue against. So there's that as well. So free speech is a big aspect. I think a big weapon in the arsenal. But another thing is consequence, right? We need consequences. We need university academics who say, no, Dr. Brash cannot come onto our campus because his ideas might make people feel unsafe. That person should lose their job. There is no way that that person belongs in the academy. There is no way that person should be receiving a taxpayer-funded salary, I reckon. And this also equally applies to the civil service. Like we have a civil service which openly defies government policy and the will of the people by introducing all of this left-wing horseshit, if you ask me.
Yep, completely agree.
Yeah. All right, turning to the comments. Wait, bros, I read that. TNS says, here's one for you guys. Humour me. SEMA pulls from the coalition implementing a snap election. What follows? Let the people decide. TNS, I think that's a good idea. National have got to get rid of Chris Luxon. That guy is not the antidote to Adernism. He's the continuation of it. For our country to survive, Chris Luxon certainly needs to go. And if possible, National needs to become a minor party inside the coalition. PLJ says yes, but need just a few more solidifying outcomes, Trump effect and more teasing. Cindy, yeah, I think we'll probably talk a little bit about Trump later in the episode because, guys, it is only, I mean, that guy is going to be the president again in about, 9 hours. So that's, that is absolutely going to be world changing. And I'm sure Eeryk has got an opinion about all of that. Waitbrush and Brash cites Nelson Mandela. I so wanted to like Don Brash, but I just can't. He is so utterly sheltered. I don't know, Waitbrush. I've spent some time with that man and I've had a bit to do with him. I've got to say that I have an awful lot of respect for him. He is certainly the kindest, nicest gentleman in New Zealand public life that I know. Sue says, Andrew Tate, wannabe of the week. That is pretty funny. I think we should probably put some thought into that. I don't think I'm going to win that one. Waitbrush says, TNS says, strike while the iron's hot on selected subjects. PLG says, call it when you see it. And Phil says, when equality is always conflated with equity, there will never be equality. Equity is inequality. That is right, Phil, which is why the extremist Ardern regime went through so much legislation and replaced the word equality with the word equity throughout. You will never hear a leftist using the word equality in the New Zealand context. They are always talking about equity. And as you rightly say, what they mean by that is inequality and apartheid.
I can add to that very quickly. And this is like the catch-22 of the whole equity thing, is the whole point, supposed point of equity is to have equality, at least of outcome. But the way in which you achieve that is inequality. And so you can never have it. You have to at least maintain some form of inequality in order to achieve that equity, which is equality of outcome, but at the same time, you're technically giving people unequal treatment, or you're literally giving people unequal treatment throughout that entire process to maintain this absolute fiction, and you're oppressing one group or the other to achieve it.
Yep, I think you're right, mate. TNS says, if Seymour doesn't act while this is a hot topic, the current regime will go to no ends to bury it. TNS, you're right. Christopher Luxon has effectively, whether he knows it or not, staked his reputation on spiking the Treaty Principles Bill. He is an enemy of equality in New Zealand, and that is unacceptable from the leader of a nominally right-wing party, if you ask me. PLJ says, I expect he will have many opportunities as a globalist gets screechier as Trump kicks off. I agree. Phil says, at least none of them gave a law doctorate to Ardern. Our unis aren't that bad. I don't know, Phil. Waitbrush says, any man that doesn't know about or knows but doesn't want to talk about the feral violence Mandela got up to deserves no regard. Waitbrush, yeah, that is true. I think that, some of the things that Mandela did, he was responsible for stuff like terrorist bombings and things like that. So you are right. He is not the Nobel Peace Laureate that everyone might want. Sue says equity equals separatism, and I agree. Okay, Eeryk, any of your people got comments you want to reply to?
Just a little throwback to our whole lesbian or Troon of the Week thing, and Robert suggested that maybe Luxon get lesbian of the week, and I think that's probably not the worst idea in the world. He's certainly doing his darndest to kind of put himself in the fight for that title.
Okay, all right. Well, that I think that's pretty funny. Okay, guys, look, I think it's time for another one of Eeryk's articles. Hang on, Eeryk, I've just got to find where we were up to. What were you going to talk about next?
The armed robbery with the young guy. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'll bring up that article so everyone can see it. Okay, that's on screen now. This is about this dude. Yeah, go ahead, mate.
Yep. So it's about this young guy. He was 17 when he did it with a bunch of other idiots, and they went and they stole a car. Then they drove to a Michael Hill jewelry store and they stole $378,000 worth of jewelry. As you do, it's just a standard day out for your average South Auckland teenager. But the issue is for me, it's less the fact that he did the crime; it's how he's been dealt with. And how he's been dealt with is exactly why crime rates aren't changing in this country. The exact same reason why you see the same people go in, come out, why our recidivism rates are over 70% within 5 years. And it's because of what the judge decided to do with this young man. Now, I want to put in a little bit of context here because a lot of people have no idea what the maximum possible sentences for crimes in this country are, specifically things that sound, whilst bad, not like the worst thing in the world. Like, so for example, running into a jewelry store and smashing glass and stuff. Sure, that sounds bad. Sure, $400,000 sounds bad, but you wouldn't probably quite comprehend how bad it is, at least in the eye of the law. This is a Category 3 violent offence, which is the second worst. The only real offences worse than that are things like murder. So it's a Category 3 violent offence which carries up to 14 years in prison. Now, he was, albeit mixed up in the wrong crowd and with a group of four of them, and really just kind of rocked up, it did his part, and then they went home. But what annoys me is going right down to the bottom here is the typical defense that you'll see for people in his position. And this is the sort of thing that you get from these. I want to call them woke lawyers or woke defense counsels, but at the end of the day, it's their job to defend their client to the best of their ability, even if they're guilty as sin. So I'll give them a little bit of slack there. But to start off, he was given a prison or an indication for the starting of his sentence point of 5 years and 6 months. So with a offence that carries up to 14 years, his starting point before any discounts was going to be 5 years and 6 months. He was never ever going to get any more than that. And for a first time offender, at least in the adult court, that is more than reasonable. That's what you would expect. However, his lawyer pushed for 65% in discounts for things like youth, which is common cultural background and factors, which frankly, the fact that this is still being considered is disgraceful, as well as additional 5% for remorse. And so the explanation here is that there was a letter from his grandmother outlined his upbringing, which saw that he was in state care for several years and he was a witness to drugs, alcohol, and gang life. Um, and the actual quote itself is that there's a real nexus between this offending and Mr. Thompson's upbringing and background. It involved domestic violence, drugs, alcohol, gang affiliation, state care, and I say that these are significant factors for a young boy. And whilst they're completely right that they are significant factors, is that enough of a significant factor to warrant what ends up being a slap on the wrist for a Category 3 violent offence? And the real answer is no, as far as I'm concerned. When we continue to treat young offenders like they're children who have been misunderstood and mistreated their entire lives, which means they can go do whatever the hell they want and then get away with it, we aren't teaching them anything at all, and it's just going to encourage them to do it again. So now I come back a little bit further down, and it's what the judge then has to do when deciding, okay, are we going to give them the full 65% of of the requested discounts? No. Um, Instead, he's given around 45%. And so the judge says the pre-sentence report assessed that Thompson is a low risk of reoffending and harming others, and despite it being very serious, um, the sentence is ultimately reduced from 5 years and 6 months to 23 months, minus 7 months because he spent a good 7-month period on electronically monitored bail at home. And so in the end, despite 23 minus 7, by the way, being, what is that, 16 months? That's a year and over a year. He's getting sentenced to 6 months home detention for something that he really should be going away for several years. And I personally know lots and lots and lots of 17, 18-year-olds who have done exactly this, who have done less severe offences, who have had the book absolutely thrown at them, and they are better people for it. And that's why every single time I see an offense like this and I see the judge roll over and accept the defense's position, and frankly, whatever this Crown prosecutor's doing, I don't bloody know. But it's certainly not sufficient if the end result is from 5.6 years in prison as a starting point to 6 month home detention. If you're the Crown and that's the result you're getting at the end of a sentencing hearing, that you are incompetent and need to be doing better. And so I brought this up more just to highlight another one of the reasons, another one of the areas that we need to fix up if we're going to tackle crime in this country, because this is not going to cut it. You can put as many beat cops on the street getting KFC as you like, but unless you're holding them accountable, as well as the variety of other ways that you can reduce crime, such as getting them young before they can start offending and mixing up in the wrong crowd, you're not going to achieve anything. So what do you reckon, Simon?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And a couple of things on that. The first thing is that this 23 months, of course, because the judges know that if it's a sentence under 24 months, then home detention becomes a potential. So they're always angling for that because the judges don't like to send people to prison at all. So they're always looking for some sort of reason to get underneath that 24 months, which is what they have done here so that they don't have to put this kid into jail. The other thing to note about that is that we do have some pressure coming on from the government to reduce the amount of discounts that are available to people who commit serious crimes. Like, I've seen and I've read in the paper of dudes getting discounts of 85% and above. And it's just absolutely astonishing that they can do this, and they're just really looking to find some way of excusing what is serious violent crime. I mean, this guy with a weapon was running around threatening people. It's there does. I absolutely agree. I certainly agree with you, mate. There needs to be some sort of deterrent, and I think that the judges have shown themselves time and time again to be absolutely too ideologically captured to actually represent what is best, as you say, for the offender, but also what is best for society in terms of a consequence. Now, the final point that I'd also like to make about this is one of the things that really annoys me is how gang membership or association is often is regularly typically used as a mitigating factor in sentencing. It's like, oh, this kid grew up inside a gang lifestyle. He deserves a sentence discount for it. I don't think it should be treated as a mitigating factor. I think it should be quite the opposite, the diametric opposite. It should be treated as an aggravating factor. If a person is a member of a subversive or a criminal organization, that should be taken into account at sentencing and held against them. Whether they're a member of a gang or an associate of a gang or a trade union or the Greens or Labour or Ginger, all of that, I reckon, should be held against them.
Mm. Yeah, well, I completely agree there, and it was actually very important that you mentioned the whole 24-month thing. If it's under 24 months, they can get away with a sentence of home detention. And I'd note that the government's, or at least National's, proposed change to the discounts thing is to cap it at 40%. And notably, this guy got 45%. And unless my math's wrong, if it was capped at 40% for him in particular, he would not have been eligible for home detention. So isn't it interesting that the proposed change that the National Party has suggested, which the left is an absolute up in arms about, would have dramatically changed this exact case to have had something that even remotely resembles some kind of justice? The left doesn't believe in justice, so I think that probably makes a lot of sense as to why.
Yeah, I think you're right, and the proof is in the pudding that what they did doesn't work. But don't you think it's also interesting that one of the first things that the Ardern regime did was announce their policy to depopulate the prisons by 30%. And, the argument was from extremist organizations like People Against Prisons, Aotearoa and things like that, which is, of course, representing Labour ideology, is that prisons don't work and that is not how you rehabilitate people, and the solution is to empty the jails. Now, two things about that from an international perspective. The first thing is that when the October Revolution occurred in the Soviet Union, you're sort of thinking Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, all that sort of thing. One of the first things that the new Soviet did was empty the prisons, all right? And their theory was that if you increase the threat to the public safety, the public will look to government for security. And that is one of the methods that they could use to cement their control of Russian society, right? It was absolutely deliberate. And I think it's really, really interesting that Ardern did this, set the policy. We're going to get rid of the mega prison that the previous government had been planning. We're going to decrease the prison population by 30%. And away we go. Everything is going to be unicorns and rainbows. And then Keir Starmer did the same thing, right? That, there was one of the most famous cases there was he let a guy out who'd murdered someone with a machete. The guy served 6 months. And the person who took his place was a middle-aged housewife who wrote something spicy on social media. I think to me, it just seems like another one of, I think the leftists, they are stupid, but surely the people who vote for them can see that the policies don't work and that crime goes up when you don't hold people accountable. But surely they can also see the pattern in the ideology that is doing this. Like it seems to me, deliberate.
I feel like this whole issue of it seems that people with a certain, ideological leaning one way or the other, it does seem that often they can't see what's happening right in front of them. And I'm sure this has happened throughout history to some degree, but it feels right now that it's just so easy to control how people think. It's so easy. And so it doesn't matter what one side does. If you agree with that side on a few core issues, you will excuse and ignore almost everything. And so I find unless you're someone who is extremely critical of the entire system of every ideology, you simply lack the ability in this day and age to actually kind of sift through all the bullshit, and have the discussion like me and you and I are, and everyone else kind of tuning in tonight. And so, and that's that. And I mean, we look at, you talk about Jacinda Ardern emptying the prisons by about 30%. And as that happened, crime went up by around 30%. The crime victimizations from that time period through to the next few years increased by around 30%. And so we can't just say, oh, it's all coincidence, because that's not how these things work. If you put more criminals on the street, more crimes will be committed. That's just how it is. And so, yeah, fundamentally, it doesn't work. People that support the likes of Labour Greens, they don't care. They fundamentally will block everything out. And that's just the world they want to live in, something that makes them feel good inside whilst everything around them burns. As for, people against prisons Aotearoa, they're literally run by Marxists. So, I mean, it's not surprising at all that they want to see all of the criminals roam free on the street.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. All right. Well, just on that, I'm going to bring up the next article, but I think that I have mucked up the setting and I need to reshare the window. Hold up, young fella. Yeah, there we go. I think that's it. And hopefully you can see that too. Yeah, you can see it too. All right, guys, I'm really sorry. I clicked on the wrong tab. And when I click on the wrong tab, what it does is it recycles through the chat. So long story, but basically I made a mistake. And so some of the comments that I was about to address, I can no longer see. Eeryk, was there anything on your side that you wanted to reply to?
Yeah, I do have a couple. And so quickly, Robert says, if two people earn $25 an hour and one works 30 hours and the other works 55 hours, would you expect them to get the same wage at the end of the week? No, I would not. Then we've got PvP as saying, dead right, mate. That's got to be a failure of prosecution to push the judge for more. And Southwest NZ says, NZ judges are major shareholders in our prisons. And of course, I'm not quite sure of the validity of that, given how our whole system works, but I appreciate the comments nonetheless.
All right, all good. Just on it, I'm getting a little bit of peaking when I hear your when you're close to your microphone. Do you have a limiter enabled on your mic?
Because I'm not in the system myself, no, I don't actually have anything, but I can just push it further away. It's fine.
Okay, it's all good. All right. Well, I'm just changing your levels a little bit on the fly. But guys, if you are hearing a little bit of clipping on either of our audios, please do let us know. All right, I'm going to bring up the next article, which kind of plays into your person's comment about how there is official official support, or at least tacit approval of a bunch of different crimes. And this comes to us from Spiked Online, and I thought it was from Tom, but no, it's from Tim Black, and it's talking about the grooming gangs, which is a massive issue in Great Britain, right? Like, not only the fact of the grooming gangs, which has been going on for a very, very long time, but more the issue of the fact that it has been covered up and there has been tacit approval of these gangs, and for the simple reason that there have been a huge number of people in the establishment, inside the judiciary, inside the police, social services, government, local government, and even parliament, they've had a decision to make. They've been weighing up in their minds, on the one hand, protecting our young working class white children who were being raped and abused. That is on one hand, and on the other, inter-community relations. And what seems to have happened is that in the balance of their thinking, it was worthwhile sacrificing all of those young women to maintain solid community relations. What they were really, really concerned about was particularly working class, native British people rioting and demonstrating and things like that. And this was picked up in the article. Mr. Black writes, thanks to numerous local inquiries and court cases, this much we do know about the grooming gang scandal. From at least the 1990s, and likely long before then, criminal networks prostituted, raped and tortured thousands of young girls in towns and cities across the UK, and the authorities, despite being aware of what was happening, did very little to intervene. This is what makes it such an epoch-defining scandal. Not just the violent sexual exploitation of thousands of young girls, but also the authorities' long-standing failure to stop it, because, thanks to the ethnic identity of the perpetrator, they feared doing so would provoke accusations of racism, that it would stoke tensions in already racially divided towns, so they looked the other way. The abusers were emboldened, empowered even, and the victims were betrayed. There is now little question that local constabularies, councils, and other agencies were aware of the horrific offences being committed right under their noses from at least the late 1990s onwards. Take Tom Crother Casey's 4-volume report into child sexual exploitation in Telford, Shropshire, which was published in 2022. Crowther notes that there was widespread awareness that gangs of largely Pakistani or Asian men were systematically sexually abusing youngsters at least as far back as the 1990s. It was commonly known among police officers, police civilian employees, and the public. What's more, the police intelligence system had compiled copious reports on the gang-led sexual abuse of youngsters, but had failed to act on any of them. All right, guys, I think that this is common ground. I think everyone knows this. But what is really shocking is that none of these people have ever been held accountable. No person. They're talking about somewhere between 250,000 and 750,000. That's 750,000 teenage and prepubescent, mainly girls, mainly Caucasian working class white girls, but also Sikh girls as well, were abused on an industrial scale for decades. We are talking, like, these reports go back and looking at the 1990s, but it goes, it happened before then. But we are talking about 35 years of this. In that time, no one ever lost their job. No one has ever been prosecuted for looking the other way. We are talking about senior constables, about police officers, about social workers, about politicians, about local politicians who knew about this and who looked the other way and tacitly approved of it, because in the balance of their thinking, little girls being raped was preferable to inter-community tensions. Now, why I wanted to bring this up is to make the point that while this is absolutely atrocious, it is not local to the United Kingdom. This happens everywhere. We have the same sort of thing happening in New Zealand in our justice system. For many, many reasons, cultural considerations are taken into account when people commit offences here. Guys, in the chat, I know that this is a topic which is people get really, really worked up about, but I think that we need to apply the lessons of what is happening in Great Britain to what is happening in our own countries. See how the law is selectively applied, right? Here in New Zealand, if you are a member of the rainbow community who wants to beat the pulp out of women and the elderly in Albert Park for having the temerity to express their opinions, the police not only won't prosecute you, they will aid and abet you. Conversely, if you crack some jokes on social media that the establishment doesn't like that chap Knob Oddie did last year, you remember him? The police are on your door. They are reporting you to social services to have your children taken away because they say that your garage was messy. In the end, with that guy, the firearms authority said he'd done nothing wrong. He got to keep his firearms license, but he faced hassle after hassle from the establishment because the law was selectively applied to him and it was not applied to anyone other than 2 individuals who assaulted women in Albert Park. I'm drawing a parallel here. I say they are not Pakistani grooming gangs. What they are is Labour Party grooming gangs, because most of the people who were involved in that cover-up were part of the Labour Party in the United Kingdom. The Labour Party grooming gangs tendency of the establishment to look the other way happens in New Zealand. It happens in other countries. The equality before the law is a pillar of democracy. We need to ensure that what is happening there and is happening here stops. What do you reckon, Eeryk?
Well, you're exactly right. And all we have to do is look at the likes of Aliana Rabashkin to say, oh, look, That's someone who assaulted a woman for being a woman and wanting to talk alive for everyone to see, and has a direct link to the Green Party, has worked in the Green Party, the leader, essential leader of the entire Albert Park kind of stampede. You could call it. Chanel Lau is still working within the Labour Party, as far as I'm aware. So even here, it's the exact same thing. The people that are committing the violence that goes essentially unpunished or even unmentioned are all strongly linked with left-wing political organizations and parties.
That's exactly right. And what really shocks me is just how they have the police on speed dial, right? The police will go absolutely drop everything if someone splashes some paint on a rainbow pedestrian crossing on K Road, right? But, you know, some dude robs a dairy, you'd be lucky if you ever see a policeman. Okay, coming to some of the comments in the chat, you guys. Boom, if you know, you know. 100% introduced to Divide and Conquer. TNS, you're right. Phil says, only just found out Tarrant had For Rotherham written on all his clips. Yeah, I don't know if it was on all of them, but it was certainly written on one of them, Phil. Why was his manifesto suppressed by the Ardern government? Phil, I read it before it was suppressed. The reason for it is that guy was an environmentalist. I believe there is an extremely good chance that Brenton Tarrant was a member of the Green Party. I suspect he may have attended some of their meetings, because having read his manifesto, a lot of it, you take out like the kind of the race stuff, all that sort of thing, a lot of it read just like the Green Party manifesto. I strongly suspect that was suppressed by the Ardern regime as a favor to the Green Party, so that people wouldn't draw that parallel. I'm absolutely convinced that it was suppressed so that people could not read it and realize that he was being portrayed in the media one way, when in point of fact there was more to the story, and that he was very, very environmentally conscious, and that did not suit Labour and their coalition partner, the Greens. PLJ says, so they could blame the soup kitchen operators. I don't know what that means, Phil. Rather, Pete. TNS says, you only have to cast your minds back to Ardern's words to attempt to cement over-escalating tensions between NZers and third world imports. They are us. Yep, there's some truth there, but I think New Zealand is quite lucky that we don't have those. We don't tend to have those inter-community tensions that they tend to have in other countries, and a big part of that reason is critical mass, in my opinion, right? So New Zealand, because we've tended to have quite small groups of people coming in from other countries, they've never kind of arrived in enough numbers where they can all move into the same area and speak their own language, shop in their own supermarkets, go to their own schools and that sort of thing, and maintain their culture to a degree where they're not assimilating. And you do see this, right? Like you see it in Australia, where there are areas that are predominantly Jewish or Lebanese or Vietnamese or what have you, and you do get a bit more sort of cultural conflict. In New Zealand, there's been, because there hasn't been that critical mass, it seems to me that there has been more incentive for people to kind of integrate to a degree into our culture. So I don't see so many of the immigration issues here in New Zealand that some of the other countries are having to grapple with at the moment. And what really strikes me is, there are a lot of countries now that are openly talking about strategies like repatriation. I see things like I was watching the podcast of the Lotus Eaters earlier today, and they were talking about that, which I found quite astonishing. And we're not talking about here like getting rid of illegal immigrants and criminals. What they're talking about is offering incentives, as some countries, and I think Sweden does, to offer financial incentives to people who are of those ethnic backgrounds, and saying, look, here's €20,000, just go away. So that is that is a very interesting broad social trend. PLJ says, wearing a burqa, I mean Meghan Markle did Meghan, you're talking about Ardern wearing the headdress. Yeah, that was well, that was certainly a look. Apparently many Muslim teens in the UK believe the UK is an Islamic nation. Yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's an Islamic nation, but they certainly could choose better. Archbishop of Canterbury's. In many areas they are demographically dominating, breeding 3 times the local rate. That is very true. through PLJ, and I know that from living in the UK myself, there were certainly large areas, but that's not just the UK. That happens in countries like Australia and stuff as well. Shortland Chambers notes, Shanoil Lal will be 17 on Labour's list in 2026. Yep, when it comes to deporting immigrants, he would be very high on my personal list. Phil says it's getting more and more that way, though. Luckily, Labour didn't build all those houses. Yeah, Labour can't build anything. And PLJ says the Pope is frowning at Trump's repatriations too. All right, Eeryk, you got some final thoughts on that stuff?
Um, no, I wouldn't say anything in particular that hasn't already been covered. Outside of, look, I mean, we are, as you're saying, fortunate that we don't have, like the very large, or obviously ethnically kind of dense communities in New Zealand, where you can go to one area and you're like, okay, that's just filled with Indians, or that's just filled with the Lebanese and whatever. We are fortunate to have it, and I think we do have generally a pretty good kind of half assimilated mix going on in our community, which it doesn't seem to really bother the majority of people, at least in my experience. So I think we are lucky in that respect, and so we should take the lessons of other countries to ensure that we don't end up in that position where suddenly it is just an inherently divided society where one community is off doing their own thing, and there's all these unneeded conflict.
Oh, I agree, and a huge part of that is just of resisting leftism, right? Because leftism is all about creating those intercultural tensions, and it's why they talk about decolonization and all of that kind of stuff. It's about, all right, we want to just turn everything anti-Western and anti-capitalist, and it helps to create inter-community tensions. PLJ says Chowick, East Auckland. That's what my Chinese mates call it. Yeah, I've got Chinese mates that do that too. But I don't think, like, that was certainly true a while back, like maybe 20 years ago. But Howick is really quite affluent, and for no small part because Chinese immigrants to this country tend to work hard, and they work hard and work long hours, and they do become affluent, and Howick is quite an affluent area. And I haven't been there for a while, but my understanding is demographically it's less Oriental than it perhaps once was. Embrace Empathy says, why hasn't this race agenda been stopped? The government seems to be allowing it. Paul Goldsmith refused to comment on the Browntown issue. Why on earth would he have no comment? Embrace Empathy. Yeah, I know. I got a letter, or rather an email from Hobson Pledge and Don Brash, which was really, really interesting. But there was no reference material in it, so I didn't bring it up for us to talk about. But it was saying that, in Wanganui, there is a real press from that local government to introduce co-governance. But it's actually gone worse than that, that it's actually being introduced, or rather discussed and negotiated, as part of a treaty settlement with the local iwi in Wanganui. So that is quite an escalation, where what the national government is doing in their treaty negotiations with the local iwi is at that government legislative national level mandating co-governance into the Wanganui region. So I'm going to have a little bit more, do a little bit more research into that. But yeah, that is the reason why. It's because National, and particularly Christopher Luxon, are wholly on board with He Puapua and all of that apartheid nonsense that the Ardern regime imposed upon us. They aren't talking about it because they don't want to resist it. They largely agree with it. All right. If you are looking for someone who is the philosophical guiding light for this version of the National Party, it's the previous treaty negotiations minister, Chris Finlayson, if you ask me. I did say Wanganui, Phil. You are correct. All right, Eeryk, any of your people you need comments to respond to?
Oh, yes, we got Matthew has said, mate, you are above and beyond this. Yes, you, Eeryk. Thank you very much. I'd say the same about Simon. He's above and beyond in his preparation with these articles. As well as Vikash Patel has said, just reminding us all that the inauguration of Trump starts at 6 a.m. our time tomorrow morning, and that we're also very lucky not to have grooming gangs here, although we probably do have it to some degree. Just look at the mongrel mob. That's how they like to initiate some of their members.
Yeah,
So,
that's exactly right. And I mean, we do have ethnic grooming gangs here like this.
yeah.
Guys, Eeryk, do you know who Leo Kearse is?
No, I don't recognise that name.
You don't. Okay, he's a Scottish dude. He's a Scottish comedian he's had a career as he's now a presenter on GB News, and he's an extremely funny man. And I just one of the reasons I just absolutely love him is he happened to be filming outside of Buckingham Palace about 2 years ago and was challenged by the armed police. Oh, what are you doing? You know, that kind of thing. Like, I mean, it was friendly enough. They were being friendly enough, but they were armed police guarding outside Buckingham Palace who challenged a comedian about why he was filming outside there. And quick as a flash, the first thing he said to the police officer was, "I'm here to see if Prince Andrew would like to join my grooming gang." Guys, follow Leo Kearse on social media. That guy is seriously funny. All right, well, talking about this Trump stuff, we've got some more articles we want to go through, but I realize we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes, so we've got about 40 minutes left, and we should probably talk about the fact that, as your lad says, Eeryk, you know, we're 8 hours away from the world changing with the Trump presidency. What do you reckon's going to happen?
Well, I suppose there has been the whole issue with the venue being changed, or a few of the specifics about the whole inauguration, having a few changes here and there to account for so-called dangerous cold. Based on the forecast, it does look like there's probably some merit to that. I don't think we could. I think it would be naive of all of us to pretend that there's no actual threat to Trump's life at this inauguration, given how much the media has spurred him up as to be some, fascist leader or dictator that's about to take over and utterly destroy the Western world. So I think there's some merit to the idea that there has been a bit of confusion and changes with respect to the inauguration to throw off any plans on taking him out or causing an issue just generally within the crowds that would have built outside.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be interesting, and what I'm really enjoying is the salt. Looking forward to enjoying is the salt mining. Like, I'm certainly not Trump's biggest fan in the world, but I'm certainly going to agree to enjoy watching the meltdowns from all of the leftists, particularly in the United States. I don't know why these people, firstly, get so emotional about it, and secondly, think it's a good idea to get really, really emotional about it, film it, and publish it on the internet. But I'm very, very pleased that they do, because I just find it absolutely delicious. But what I'm more interested in from hearing from you is, because a lot of people like me are looking at Trump as a symbol of hope for the world, right? That because of American cultural imperialism, we're going to have Trump as the antidote to a bunch of stuff, and because he'll introduce it in the United States, and then it will permeate out into the rest of the world. And a good example is, and I saw Roe Edge and Katrina Biggs and people like that posting about this on social media today, that Trump is saying on day one there will be no men competing in women's sports. Okay, now you think about that, right? Like, that is the sort of thing that we want to see here. Raylene Castle, that bloke who runs Sporting New Zealand, wants to maintain it, as do all of the leftists, or that sort of thing, right? And we hope to see that American cultural imperialism will cause that permeation. But it actually when it comes to the sport thing, I think it's going to happen a lot quicker culturally, for the simple reason that if the United States says, okay, men are not competing against women in sport in our country, they're big enough and powerful enough to implement that across every sport, right? From the World Boxing Association to the International Olympic Committee. All those organizations are really just going to have to come on board with what the Americans say and do. So, for an example, if the Americans say to the International Olympic Committee, right, we are not going to have this Khalif dude from Tunisia or wherever he's from beating the pulp out of women in the boxing, that's not going to happen anymore, or our athletes are not showing up at the Olympics will buckle under. All right. Sorry, Gavin Hubbard, you can't compete for New Zealand in women's weightlifting anymore, because America has that much authority. I think in other areas of wokeness, the cultural permeation out to the rest of the world may take a little bit more time, particularly because there's just going to be massive resistance from within the institutions, academia, the bureaucracy, the leftists, every local councillor, every member of the Green Party, right? They are all going to resist this tooth and nail. But I think there's going to be some really, really rapid wins. What do you reckon?
Well, yeah, I think you're right. And if we look at things like the International Olympic Committee, for an example, I mean, you've just said that Trump reckons day one, women will no longer have to deal with men in their sports. Well, given that the next host of the Olympic Games is Los Angeles, I don't exactly think that at the start of Trump's term we can have him making that declaration and then all of a sudden have a bunch of blokes beating up women in the Olympics 4 years later now, can we?
Good point. Good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, really true. All right. Well, look, that is my big hope for the Trump presidency is that all of this stuff is just going to, the world is going to turn away from wokery and just embrace rationalism. And I'm hoping that a Trump presidency accelerates that. Okay. Patel News in the chat. G'day, mate. Says, hey, Simon, can you talk more about the co-governance in Wanganui being out of politics for a bit? Patel News, that has really only just percolated up into my consciousness over the last sort of 24 hours that there has been this acceleration. But I see further down in the chat, TNSNZ has given a link to a news article at the People's Republic of Radio New Zealand. I will have more to say about it on my live show on Sunday. By then, I will have done the research and maybe had a chat with some of the people involved. All right, guys, we should probably move on to our next article, which comes to us, and let me bring that up. This is one from Eeryk about the far left losing their mind about the rise of fascism, aka normal people. All right, walk us through it, mate.
Yeah, well, as you can see, the global rise of fascism and how to fight it. Now, I've actually got a couple of ideas myself about how to fight it, and it starts by highlighting articles like this and the fact that it's the actual fascists writing it. But I'll quickly go over the start, and there's only really a couple paragraphs that that we need to go over, but do feel free to go and have a look in your own time. So it says, as we acknowledged in the last few days, we live in extremely challenging times, to use a euphemistic phrase. We are threatened with climate catastrophe. We are experiencing the deeper entrenchment of neoliberalism, resulting in unheard of rates of inequality. We see in full view genocide carried out by the Israel-US axis in Gaza. And we are witnessing the rise of fascism globally. When far-right personalities and movements started popping up during the last 2 decades, there was in some quarters strong hesitation to use the F word to describe them. Indeed, as late as less than 3 years ago, I had to defend the use of the word fascist in the Cambridge Union debate against academics who were squeamish about employing it to describe far-right movements in Europe, the United States, and other parts of the world. What Donald Trump and the January 6th, 2021 insurrection have shown, however, is that the distinction between far-right and fascist is academic. Or one can say that a far-rightist is a fascist who has not yet seized power, for it is only once they are in power that fascists fully reveal their propensities. Now, the one other thing I want to read, and I really want everyone to just think about these 5 points very carefully as I read this. And this is, a movement or person must be regarded as fascist when they fuse all or most of the following 5 features. So think about all the possible people that could match, or movements that could match these 5 features. They show a disdain or hatred for democratic principles and procedures. They tolerate or promote violence. They have a heated mass base that supports their anti-democratic thinking and behavior. They scapegoat and support the persecution of certain social groups, and they are led by a charismatic individual who exhibits and normalizes all of the above. Now, I don't want to like throw anything, throw any names out there, but I think we all get a pretty good idea of which groups in society these days, particularly in the West, exhibit these 5 features the most. And
Mate,
something
you're
tells me,
absolutely right. You're
something
absolutely
tells
sorry
me
to
it's
interrupt.
not Trump. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And those 5 features, and just to run through them, everyone, they show a disdain or hatred for democratic principles and procedures. Labour and the Greens in New Zealand. They tolerate or promote violence. Definitely the Green Party in New Zealand at Albert Park, and Labour. They have a heated mass base that supports their anti-democratic thinking and behaviour. Labour and the Greens. They scapegoat and support the persecution of certain social groups. Caucasian people by Te Pāti Maori, the Greens and Labour. And 5, they are led by a charismatic individual who exhibits and normalises all of the above. I don't know how charismatic Chloe Swarbrick and Jacinda Ardern are. They certainly aren't charismatic to me, but they seem to be to them. I think this is absolutely hilarious, Eeryk, and I'm glad you brought this out. I've never heard of Focus Web before, and I've never heard of Walden Bellow, whoever he is, he or she, I'm assuming a man, but it is just unbelievable that this is someone who is claiming to have actually participated in an Oxford debate, who is too fucking stupid to realize that his 5 definitions perfectly match pretty much every left-wing political movement in the West today.
Exactly. And that's where it really is. They're all in this postmodernist way of thinking, where it's all about my truth. They view absolutely everything about themselves to be pure, and not remotely consistent, with the at least any of the negative things associated with fascism, and everything they do is justified because it's against the fascist, otherwise known as the average centrist.
All right, was there anything else in this article you wanted to read? Because it looks pretty awesome, this one.
Um, I do believe I came down to, I believe, fascism and big capital, and I had that'll be the
Oh, yeah.
headline, big capital, and I do believe there was very quickly some here. I'll quickly just read that whole section. Fascism can be reduced to cannot be reduced to a conspiracy by big capital to repressively stabilize society and promotes its interest, as traditional Marxists saw it. Fascists are not mere instruments of the elite. In fact, their rhetoric is not only anti-democratic or anti-liberal, but also often anti-capitalist or anti-big business. Well, that's bloody fascinating considering who's writing it. Witness how Trump and his followers claim that they are anti-big tech or against the plutocrats, fascists, however, do not seek to overthrow big business. They merely want an accommodation with capital to serve their movement's own interests, but with them in the driver's seats. During normal times, fascists and big capital can sometimes have different stands on some issues, as for instance in the case of woke capitalism, where corporations piously assert their corporate policies should be pro-environment or politically correct in hiring practices when it comes to race and gender. However, these differences are transient and minor, and when capital is threatened by movements that cut into their profits or threaten their economic hegemony, it welcomes efforts by fascists to stabilize or sanitize the social order. Now, off the top of my head, I can't recall why I wanted to highlight that in the first place, but it does kind of, I don't know, try and deal with this or discuss this issue from the whole position of big capital and the supposed hypocrisy you could find with, those in the Trump camp. Um, but yeah, I can't actually recall. So if I'm honest, why I had that certain section opened up as something to read.
Okay, well,
But
what I think is fascinating is it's a redefinition, right? Like if you look at actual fascism as an ideology, and you're talking about that dude Gentile, Gentile was the fascist theorist that was prominent in the 1920s and 1930s. Fascism is quite an incoherent sort of a philosophy, but it certainly is not being it is not adequately described. So I'm glad that you highlighted that section, because this guy's just making shit up, as far as I can determine, and mangling the definition to fit his worldview. But what do you reckon? I found the section here, how to counter fascism. I haven't read it, but I'm assuming you have. I think this is going to be pretty funny. Do you want to walk us through this bit?
Yeah, more than happy to. So starts off by saying, let me end by proposing several moves we can take to deal with the fascist threat. First, we need to stop resorting to easy explanations about the rise of the far right, like the claim that trolls are responsible for it, and acknowledge that far right personalities and movements have a critical mass of popular support. Second, we must acknowledge that in being able to mobilize people using the most up to date methods available on the internet, the fascists are far ahead of us. Next, we need to find ways of stopping the extreme right from coming to power in the first place, like building broad, united electoral fronts, even with non fascist groups we may have differences with. It's much harder to remove the far right once they're in power, of course.
Let me interrupt you there. Okay, so that is just communist revolutionary theory 101. That is this is
Yeah.
in communist theory, this is what they call a populist front. All right,
Yeah.
do continue.
Fourth, we need to make sure we have at the leading edge of our resistance, the whole use of the words resistance says it all, those movements which have a great deal of resonance among broad sectors of the population, including the middle classes, such as the movements to stop climate change, promote gender equality, and advance racial justice. I'm sure everyone on the
And
right
there
can get
we
on board with
go.
that.
There we go. That is it. That is exactly right. I mean, this guy is just straight up fucking admitting it. The communists lost the economic argument. Anyone who has read the first 9 chapters of Marx's Capital know that it is just utter gobbledygook, right? It just does not make any sense whatsoever. It is not logical. That the mass behind it is just ludicrous. So what they've done, having lost the economic argument in the 20th century, is they've looked to win the social policy argument. And this guy is admitting it. To stop fascism, what his definition of fascism, what we need to do is to form big populist fronts about advancing racial justice, which means equity and anti-Western theory and anti-Caucasian policies, promote gender equality, meaning troons, and stop climate change, which means anthropogenic global warming, the nonsense and the bullshit of all of that. This guy is straight up fucking admitting that all of those things are just vehicles for him and his comrades to achieve their political objectives. I love this guy. He is my kind of stupid. All right, moving on to the next paragraph, mate. Read it, walk us through that.
Fifth, we must fiercely defend human rights and democratic values, even where, or especially where, they have become unpopular. This will involve aggressively championing people and groups that are currently persecuted, with majority opinion being whipped up against them, like Muslims in India and non white immigrants in both the United States and Europe. International solidarity with the persecuted is an essential element of the anti fascist project. Sixth, let's not fear to see what we can learn from the extreme right, especially when it comes to the politics of passion or the politics of charisma, and see how our values can be advanced or promoted in passionate and charismatic ways. We must unite reason to passion and not see them as being in contradiction, though of course we must not violate our commitments to truth, justice, and fair play in the process.
My God, right? Like doing everything you can to suppress free speech, to to call anything which is facts you don't like misinformation and disinformation, and to cost people their livelihoods if they argue against you. All right, go, tell us about point 7.
Yeah, very quickly, I would note when we go back to the points he made about what you need for a fascist leader is charisma. Now, what he's outlining here is that the way to fight fascism is to get a really charismatic leader and lead a really populist, charismatic movement in order to overthrow the very thing they're trying to whatever, and become what it is that they so strongly oppose. Seventh, if history, especially of the United States, is any indication, one must not preclude the possibility of violent civil war, and should that become a real threat, to take the appropriate steps to counter it. Now, if I were to be in that situation, the way I would counter it is to mobilize the entire military and make all of the people that are normal be put in the gulags. That's just one suggestion. Um, but probably most important, we need to have a transformative vision that can compete with that of the far right, one based on genuine equality and genuine democratic empowerment that goes beyond the now discredited liberal democracy. Some call this vision socialism. Others would prefer another term, but the important thing is its message of radical, real equality beyond class, gender, and race. Rosa Luxemburg, the martyred German Marxist, wrote that the future belonged either to socialism or barbarism. In the 20th century, barbarism was stopped in its tracks. Will that also be the case in the 21st century? Well, let me end by saying that there is no guarantee that fascism will not triumph, but it will certainly win unless we put ourselves, body and soul, fully and smartly on the line to stop it. Thank you.
You couldn't make this. You couldn't make this up. The absolute state of these ignorant Marxist fools, right? Marxism murdered 100 million people in the 20th century, and they are pushing shit like that. Okay,
Yeah.
guys, I am conscious that we are into the final 20 minutes, and we still got a bit of stuff to get through. Turning to the comments. Twiggy is here. Hello. Haven't seen Twiggy for a while. Hey mate, hope you and the fam are well. Yep, all good. My brain just blown away. PvP. All right, good to know. Phil says sanitize the social order. Is that like only source of truth? The sanitized truth that we are allowed? Exactly right, Phil. That is precisely what they are talking about. And Sue says Procrustean definition. I don't know what Procrustean is, Sue. You'll have to educate me. And Sue says funnier than Owen Jones. Yeah, oh, don't you just love Owen Jones? He is my absolutely favorite dumb communist. That guy is just awesome. Several years ago, some dudes, he got mouthy in a pub, and a couple of dudes gave him some free democracy lessons, and they were prosecuted for it afterwards. I would love to see the video. I would find it very, very satisfying, as non-violent as I am, of seeing Owen Jones getting some democracy lessons from some patriots. I feel like I'm being exposed to a struggle session. Please stop. Yes, so exactly right. It's exactly like a communist struggle session. The sort of thing out of China's Cultural Revolution. This guy, I'm going to look him up after the episode. His name is Walden Bello, which I'm guessing is an Italian, might be an Italian surname. Yeah, I'm going to look him up because this guy is great fun. And Waitbrush says, can we get a link for Eeryk's X? Yep. Eeryk is, I'll put that up into chat shortly. All right. Actually, I'll do that now just while I can find it. One moment, you guys. Where are you, Eeryk? There you are. Okay, 1 moment. And Simon clicks on the wrong.
I'm right here.
There we go. I've put a link up to it. Okay, you guys, we are getting down into the sort of the final 15 to 20 minutes, and I really wanted to talk about this thing from Muriel Newman. She did this fantastic article. Let me bring it up for you guys to have a look at. This is a whole bunch to unpack, right? Like Eeryk and I could probably talk to this for a couple of hours. But maybe we'll spend sort of 15, 20 minutes on it now to just sort of go through what she was saying. So she posted this on the 18th, so 2 days ago. And I didn't bring this up deliberately on my Simon TV episode last night because I wanted to talk about it with the young fella. She writes, freedom, democracy, and the rule of law are the cornerstones of a modern society. Hard to believe that we actually need to be saying that in modern New Zealand discourse. She is right, but that is actually up for argument. And it's because 50% of the population, everyone who votes for Labour, the Greens, and the Maori Party, believe that those things are not true. They do not believe in freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, and they are doing everything that they possibly can to undermine it, or, if they're not inside those political parties, voting for it. Dr. Muriel continues, so let's start 2025 with a quick stock take of how well these foundations are being defended. Oh, yes, let's do that. First of all, it's important to remind ourselves that the coalition was elected on a promise of reversing Labour's destructive policy agenda that was undermining all three pillars of our society. Are you fucking listening, Chris Luxon? Fucking listen. Freedom. Under Labour, freedom was under threat as never before. Like an authoritarian dictator, the former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern used the pandemic to declare she was the single source of truth. Anyone opposing her views not only risked being cancelled, but could end up with the police knocking on their door, and they did. In the name of empathy and compassion, powerful new hate speech laws were being planned that would have criminalised anything Labour disagreed with. Misinformation and disinformation centres had been established to promote Labour's woke agenda and suppress views that did not conform. Social media had become a censorship minefield until Elon Musk restored freedom to Twitter. Now Donald Trump's election as US president appears to be restoring it to Facebook, although not yet in New Zealand. Whilst our coalition government has ditched the hate speech restrictions and is now attempting to restore free speech to universities, whether they comply or remain defiant is yet to be seen. And that's the problem the coalition faces. Dr. Newman is right on this point. All too often, their policy changes fall on deaf ears. They are battling a state sector that is largely hostile to anything that threatens their deeply rooted commitment to the agenda put in place by the Ardern government. With too many ministers not following through to ensure the changes they have introduced are being enacted as proposed, there are now claims that the coalition is in government but not in power. And we see it for ourselves whenever we turn on television New Zealand news. Aotearoa still features strongly as the name of our country. The Maori language continues to be liberally splashed around, and some weather presenters use only Maori place names, rendering the forecast incomprehensible to most New Zealanders. NZ is a flagship operation, high profile and state owned. One would have expected it to uphold government policy. Why they haven't been brought into line more than a year after the election is a good question. Is it time to replace the board, or do management and senior staff need to go as well? Whatever the solution, this dithering by the coalition is making it look weak and foolish. I absolutely agree. I have been arguing for weeks that when someone like Una Jagos, the what's her position? It's the Attorney General, or is she the Solicitor General? Solicitor General. When someone like that unilaterally tries to introduce racist apartheid to our criminal justice system, the question has to be asked, why wasn't she immediately sacked? Why wasn't there a police complaint? Why wasn't there something done to remove that woman from her job? Same thing with TVNZ, as Dr. Newman rightly asks, why are the civil service resistant to government policy, which is also just conveniently the will of the people, and are resisting it and are not losing their jobs because of it, or otherwise being forced to do what we, the people, pay them to do? Eeryk, what do you reckon the solution is?
The solution, I just think a backbone. If you don't have a backbone, you're just wasting your time. Doesn't matter what you say. And so, yeah, as you were saying, and with Una Jagos, whatever's going to do what she does, sack her. There is absolutely nothing to justify keeping her in that role. And I think it also goes to the government putting a bit too much power in the hands of the bureaucrats. I mean, even when it comes to things like, hey, we need a cost cut in your specific, sector, we're going to put you in charge of choosing who loses their jobs. So all of a sudden, all of the people that are actually doing something of use are losing their jobs, whilst they sit on their cushy, six-figure salaries. So I think it's just not only a lack of a backbone, but how they go about doing things, which is a lot of delegation, saying, we're going to be a bit hands-off, we're going to leave it in the hands of you to sort this shit out, we're going to set expectations, but there doesn't seem to be any follow-through on those expectations. There don't seem to be any consequences when those expectations aren't met.
Yeah, I agree. All right. This article, guys, is fantastic, and I am going to put a link up to it in the chat because it's well worth reading. And as I say, there's an awful lot to go through here, and I'm really just skimming the surface. But I'm going to come on to the next pillar of democracy, which is democracy, which Dr. Newman wanted to talk about. We hoped Hipuapua had died with the Ardern government. Not so. Hipuapua roadmap to replace democracy with tribal rule by 2040, the 200th anniversary of the Treaty of Waitangi, continues to threaten our democratic future. That is true. An example of its continued influence can be seen in the recent consultation on the Ministry of Regulation's proposed regulatory standards bill. Iwi leaders criticised it for not including a specific Treaty of Waitangi clause. The discussion document prepared by the new ministry states the Ministry for Regulation has produced a treaty impact analysis which provides the ministry's initial analysis of the treaty impacts of the proposal. Yet New Zealanders were under the impression that when the coalition pledged to stop all work on Hipuapua, the Treaty of Waitangi would no longer be considered in the governing of our country, except except in treaty settlements. What the Regulation Ministry's heavily redacted treaty impact analysis shows is that the government is still evaluating legislation against Treaty Principles Bill, guided by a radical Cabinet Office directive created by the Ardern government to deliver He Puapua. Why is that document being redacted? The reason it is being redacted is because it is produced for a national-led government that maintains this racist He Puapua nonsense from the Ardern government, and the National Party and Christopher Luxon does not want the New Zealand people to see that they are doing He Puapua just like Ardern did. In other words, Dr. Muriel Newman writes, this brand new ministry has clearly embraced He Puapua. What has also become clear over the last year is that a softly approach does not work against tribal activism. There is only one way to stop this madness, and that's to draw a line in the sand and say, no, all references to the treaty, except from settlement legislation, and all references to race should be removed from the statute books. Once again, Christopher Luxon, are you listening? Because Dr. Newman, if you ask me, is writing here exactly what the majority of people in New Zealand think, and anyone who believes in democracy believes. What do you reckon, Eeryk?
Oh, I mean, I completely agree. And when it comes to things like He Puapua, exactly, you are right. That's what we're supposed to get rid of. That is the entire, I think, point for many people when it came to voting in 2023 was, okay, we need to, one, have some people that are at least more competent, even if they're still somewhat incompetent, to run the economy, and we need to tackle the stupid shit that was being promoted in He Puapua. And so the whole kind of secrecy and redacted nature of all this sort of stuff, it's actually first I've heard of it, but it's obviously quite telling that they need to redact a bunch of this information. But in terms of what we actually do about it, I mean, I think it's quite clear what needs to be done. We're just in a very unfortunate situation that it's not going to be done. I mean, if we look at New Zealand First and Winston Peters, he's at least taken the stance in the last few years that he's utterly infuriated that He Puapua was kind of written and brought in under his nose, and he's extremely angry about it, as we all should be like him. But unless he takes that exact stance in his current coalition and does something about it, then frankly I think he's failing. But two, not only do we need to stop that, we also need to say enough is enough. Just Christopher Luxon, either support the referendum on the Treaty Principles Bill, or you're fired, or you're getting replaced. Someone's going to roll you. Or, I mean, on top of that, and on top of that, I should say, we should just say this is a kind of a crossroads for us politically as a nation. It's no point just having a simple referendum on this. Let's just go the full course and say referendum on the Treaty Principles Bill, referendum on the Māori electorate seats, referendum on absolutely every contentious issue that has any relation to He Puapua and race relations, and just get it all out in the open, see what the people have to say. And if at the end of the day we all decide that we want to live in some racially separatist nation, then we can do that. Thank you very much.
Fair enough. Yeah, and some people will say, okay, well, that's direct democracy when you put everything to referendum like that rather than representative democracy. To which I say, well, there's two arguments against that. One is that countries like Switzerland do very, very well out of having in their cantons, they have very much a direct democracy where they make a lot of decisions by putting them to the people. The second thing is, in the New Zealand context, it is the accepted form that anything that is constitutional is not decided by Parliament, it is put to referendum and it is decided by the people. I absolutely agree with Eeryk. These matters are too important, and the future of our country as a liberal democracy is at stake. We cannot have Christopher Luxon is at best. His government can be at best described as technocratic. If we were being uncharitable, as I'm inclined to be towards that man, we would say that he is a continuance of Ardern's racist, extremist ideology, and that just cannot. We cannot go ahead as a country with these questions hanging over us, if you ask me. Okay. I realize we've got about 5 or 10 minutes to go, and there's one little bit of this article I did want to read to you guys because I thought that this was also pretty critical and plays to some of what Eeryk and I were talking about earlier, and it's about the rule of law. A further front of attack and political activism within the judiciary. The introduction of tikanga, or Maori custom, which can mean whatever anyone wants it to mean, into the law has been driven by the activist judges of the Supreme Court. This week's guest commentator is former judge and law lecturer Anthony Willey. I referenced the article that she is talking about here in last night's show. For my comments on that in some detail, you could watch that on replay. An outspoken critic of the inclusion of tikanga in the law, he has identified a new emerging threat to the rule of law, the proposed introduction of bijural law. He explains that merging tikanga with the common law into a new bijural legal system for New Zealand is the objective of a newly appointed judge to the Court of Appeal. Can you believe that? There is a new appeals court judge who has been appointed, we did not elect him, who wants to replace New Zealand's common law with tikanga. He wants a judicial system which he is calling, what's his term? Bijural. What it means is introducing tikanga alongside, and which everyone knows means above accepted common law. Dr. Newman continues, and he is deeply concerned that someone with such radical intent would have been approved by this government. I am absolutely blown away by that too. Now we have Justice Christian Wata, not only an advocate of tikanga, but seeking to use it to develop his bijural system of law. If this is allowed to continue, and if Parliament does not repeal the regulations requiring the insertion of tikanga in most law subjects, then litigation will become a lottery, with the prize going to the most imaginative tikanga educated counsel. It requires no conspiracy theorizing to see this as part of the wider drive to dismantle a pillar of our democracy and oppose the pernicious Adern He Puapua construct in which a small group of activist Maori seek to impose their wishes on the public with the long-term goal of taking over the governance of New Zealand. The rot is now too deeply embedded in our politics and in the law to continue hoping, as do some of our political leaders, that it will go away and common sense and equal rights will prevail is utterly misguided. They will not. It is time, she writes. The coalition told us whether they intend to remove tikanga from the law or allow it to fester and undermine the rule of law in New Zealand. We have 4 minutes left to go. Eeryk, what do you reckon about that? I think it was pretty hard hitting.
One line in particular, and it's the prize going to the most imaginative tikanga educated counsel. And to that I say, objection, Your Honour. I'm from Te Whanua, Apanui, and we have slightly different tikanga on this matter, so I think we should just throw the case out. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Guys, it's good evening. We're into the sort of the final format. I can see on my channels there's about 1,500 people tuned in. Lovely that you could all join us there on the show. Got a few people tuned in on your channels, mate?
Oh yeah, we've got a few hundred over on X, as well as a little bit of help from YouTube, and they've all done a good job. Finally, someone on X actually commented to Simon Acker saying that define the principles holds the same weight as define fair share of tax.
Yeah, that's very, very true. All right. Well, the last time we did an episode, I think we had about 1,600 viewers. So it sounds like we might have about 2,000 people tuned in, which is pretty damn cool for us for our second episode. But guys, just before we do say good evening, I wanted to read Dr. Newman's conclusion here to you. While the coalition is clearly making progress in delivering their election pledges, I'd argue with that, they are weak in some of the key areas that underpin the freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. Many state institutions have been captured by radicals and continually undermine the coalition. Through their biased reporting, the mainstream media poison the public's mind against the new government, and the tribal leaders continue their lust for power, assisted not only by the public sector and the media, but also by the courts. That is the reality of New Zealand in 2025. The coalition has a year to turn things around so that we begin the journey to the election. They can demonstrate they have the situation under control instead of merely saying so. Whether they are up to the task remains the big question of 2025. I could not agree with more. I think that is just an absolutely wonderful article. And if I haven't already, I am going to put that up into the chat. Guys, it is time for us to say good evening. Eeryk is going to take us out.
Yes, and so I thought the best way to take us out this evening was to give a big cheers to Donald Trump as he takes back the presidency in the next few hours. So cheers to him, but also just a huge thank you to everyone that did come along for the ride. What was it, close to around 2,000 of you today? That's absolutely awesome, and tuning in, sharing your thoughts and opinions as we went along, covering these very many topics. If you do want to see any more of these episodes with Simon and myself, I'm sure would be interested in doing it again, so long as it is what the people want, because we are people pleasers after all. And so whether we're coming in the shape of, Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, or whether that's the Dalai Lama and the Pope again, I'm sure we are more than happy to return and and fill your living room or wherever the hell you like to watch it on the toilet for all I care. So a big thanks to Simon for joining me tonight, and I hope you all have a very lovely few hours ahead of Donald Trump's inauguration.
Yeah, fantastic. What are you gonna are you gonna get up and watch it all go down?
I will probably, only because of the slight chance that some, shenanigans go on.
Some
But
craziness. Yeah,
yeah, of
yeah. Well, God forbid there's any violence. I think that's the last thing that
course.
anyone would like to see. All
Yeah.
right. Yep. Well, that's everything from me. We've just gone over the 2 hour mark, guys. Thank you very much for the pleasure of your company. This has been episode 2 of the Eeryk and Simon show. I had an awful lot of fun doing it. So did the kid, from the sounds of things. Hope you all did too. And I think we should probably have a chat, don't you reckon, about maybe doing these on a bit, getting to the point, just maybe doing it regularly. What do you reckon?
Oh, I completely agree, Simon. So yeah,
Okay.
let's see if we
Okay.
can sort that out.
Okay. All right. And what are you next on by yourself?
To be decided.
To be decided. Okay, guys. Well, look, I'll be on next Sunday, and of course, this will be for my regular Simon TV show, and I'll have a chat to the kid about what we can do to sort of set up something a little bit more regularly. The other thing to note is I have launched my more formal podcast of pre-recorded content, which is a little bit more polished, a little bit more sort of thoughtful and thorough. Polity World. You can find links to that. The first episode went up. It was a panel discussion with a couple of very, very erudite ladies on the topic of gender theory, and I will have some more coming week by week. All right. So on that note, from me, this has been the Eeryk and Simon show. Thank you, pleasure of company. Looking forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Bye, everyone.